Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome indeed to Max Allan Collins, a titan of hard case crime. A round of applause for my friend Max Allan Collins.
And we are good friends, aren't we?
We are indeed. We're very good friends, and I'm Andrew Sumner. I'm the COO of Titan Books and Titan Comics, and I'm also very privileged to be Max's editor at Titan.
And I'm very happy because I requested you.
Yeah, right.
You're who I requested.
So
Some of your British colleagues weren't tuned into my sensibilities, I think.
that is very true, Max. Yeah, it is very true. Whereas I'm a lifelong reader of Max's, and I love the oeuvre. I'm a big fan of noir. I used to be an editor. I hadn't been editing for the last 15 years or so. Prior to, I was a journalist and I was an editor, but I was more into running the company and stuff like that. But after that personal request, how could I turn you down, mate? How could I turn you down? So Max, let's talk about this. Is a true story. Max Allan Collins is the most heavily published author at Hard Case Crime, and at Titan Books he has more books out than anyone else for both of those companies.
I'm just trying to get it right.
Yeah. So can you talk a bit about how you first came to work with us, Max? Almost 20 years ago.
Well, it actually predates when Titan took over the Hard Case Crime line, because when they had another sort of sister house that published them originally for a couple of years. I went to Titan pretty early on.
Yes.
But I was one of, there were three authors that Charles O'Dye, the editor, wanted to get, and I think two were living, and no, one was living and two were dead, and unfortunately I was the living one. I'm relieved to say. But he came to me and he had a book that he wanted to reprint, because they weren't doing anything original at that point. And I said, it was a book called Blood Money, which was the second book in the Nolan series. And the Nolan series goes back to the early 70s, really, beginning of my career. And it was the second book. And I said, well, I kind of prefer that you start with the first book, and because there's an ongoing story that happens in those novels. And so I said, why don't you just do the first two books and pay me what you would have paid me for the one book? And so that's what happened. And then he came back to me maybe a year later and said he'd like me to do my other series, Quarry, the Hitman series.
Yeah.
And I said, now Charles had started to publish some of his own stuff at Hard Case Crime, and he had a cover for his book by the great Robert McGinnis, like really this is the guy who did James Bond posters in addition to a lot of noir kind of book covers. And I just said to him, I guess it was kind of cheeky. That's kind of a British word, isn't it? Cheeky.
It's a very British word.
Okay. I said, I will do a Quarry for you if you get me a Robert McGinnis cover. And I got a phone call and I got a Robert McGinnis cover. And so then I had to write the book, didn't I?
Yeah.
And I decided that the series had been a 4-book series that had a cult following. And as Donald E. Westlake, the great Donald E. Westlake said, a cult author is 7 readers short of making a living. So, but I liked it, and it had this audience, and I really liked the character and the series, so I said, I'm going to take the opportunity to end the series. And I did a book called The Last Quarry. And then something unexpected happened, which was it did very well. Yeah. It was reviewed a lot, and it was easily the most successful of those books, and more successful than the Nolan series. And so I was standing in line with Charles at a BoucherCon banquet, and he turned to me and said, it's really too bad that you wrote The Last Quarry. And I said, well, why don't I write the first Quarry for you? And so kind of, I didn't reboot the series, but I just went about 5 years before the series had started. And so those books have kind of been chaotic in terms of where in Quarry's life and career they occur. But now we've done, I don't even know how many.
A lot.
Maybe they're now, I mean, it started with these 4 books that was a busted series.
Yeah.
And it turned into, I think 15 books. There's a TV show.
Yeah.
There was a movie. We did a graphic novel. So you can't kill this series with a stick.
It's such a glorious outcome, isn't it, mate? I mean, I just think the way that you've pulled string throughout that process, and as we've gone along, it's like suddenly this whole universe, this whole tale of this one character's life has emerged. Not sequentially, but you know, almost like C.S. Forrester and Hornblower dropping in stories throughout his life.
Well, one of the things that I've been doing in the last couple of books is that I always was writing about him kind of at my age. I mean, I was in college and he was in Vietnam, and so I've kept him a year or two younger than me, but not much. And when we got to, just recently, I started writing him at my age, or a little, he is a little younger, but he's still a coot. I mean, it's still an age that you don't see an action sort of mystery hero do. And I really have enjoyed those books. It's been just a great pleasure to explore that kind of character at a time of his life that nobody has really talked about. I mean, they're all you know, James Bond is eternally 35 years old.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
And he even at one point sort of dies in the books and comes back still 35 years old, which is a pretty good trick. So that's been one of the books, Quarry's Blood, it might have been the first I did of those, was an Edgar nominee.
Yes, wow.
So.
And a well-deserved Edgar nominee as well, mate. Let's take a step back to a character you mentioned in passing, Nolan.
Yeah.
And just to talk through how we put those Nolan editions together, which are now there in one piece with the most beautiful covers, by the way, if you're familiar with the Nolan books.
Well, you know, one of the things, again, going back to Robert McGinnis, Charles came to me when the TV show was done on Cinemax HBO. He wanted to bring them all back out, but one of the things that characterizes Hard Case Crime are these beautiful covers that look like they could have been on a 1950s or early 60s paperback, the kinds of things that McGinnis had done in that era. And McGinnis had done, obviously I mentioned that he had done the last Quarry's cover. And we had other artists that had done them, so he wasn't the regular artist, but I got to talk to him a little bit. In fact, he gave me the original. I think you know that.
Yeah.
He gave me the original of the cover of the last Quarry. So I said to Charles, you know, McGinnis has been around a long time. He's, I think, in his 80s at that time. Surely he has some pieces that haven't been used yet of this with beautiful women and guns and so on. And I said, why don't you check with him and see if there's anything unpublished that he hasn't used? And there were 4, and we needed 4. So that was serendipitous. And so they basically came to me and said, well, which cover do you think goes with which book? Which is kind of a funny thing, because at Hard Case Crime, the way Charles works, the art comes first. And so I'll have a contract for a book, and then he'll send me the cover of the book. And this is kind of an old-fashioned thing that would happen back in the day. The writer would have to write to the cover. It wouldn't be like, let's get a scene from the story and have the artist do it. So there are a number of those books where I had to, okay, well, he has a shoulder holster on this cover, so I better have him have a shoulder holster in the book. Or so I would write it into. And then McGinnis went on to do several more covers. So I think we have something like, I don't know, 7 McGinnis covers out of the 15 or so books.
Which is such an amazing batting.
Well, it's crazy. It really, really is. I mean, I feel very blessed, even though I've had to work very hard.
Yeah, wow.
But I have been very, very blessed. I mean, the idea that I had all these McGinnis covers, and this takes me back to the Mickey Spillane era where they had the wonderful covers. This keeps me going.
Yeah, of course, Max. Let's talk a bit about your signature creation, I think, Nathan Heller.
Yeah.
And who now also has a home at Hard Case Crime.
Yes, we just, and I think you know this, we just recently did a full cast audio book. It's not actually an audio book, it's really just an audio drama, and I wrote it, and it is almost 5 hours long. It's 10 chapters. And we have the cast is unbelievable. I mean, it's, you know, it's Patton Oswalt and Kate. You should go to truenoir.co and see who all is in this cast. I can't even remember them all, but I mean, it's just amazing.
It is a stellar cast.
And it's a beautiful production that Robert Meyer Burnett did, and goes back to the very first book. Now, at Hard Case Crime / Titan, we've done the two most recent books in the series. I think they're the 18th and 19th books. And really, for the first time, I'm getting the kind of covers I always dreamed of having on these books.
Yeah.
So I always thought that there should be, you know, the private eye kind of character in the trench coat and so on, but then because they're kind of epic stories.
Yes,
they're 80, 90,000 words long, which is long for, you know, the books I grew up on were all 50, 60,000 words. So it has a bigger landscape and a lot of famous historical figures, so maybe you'll see, you know, maybe is that Robert Kennedy I'm looking at, and so on and so forth. So that is something that they've done at Hard Case Crime. And Titan very much keeps an eye on Hard Case Crime and on what I do there, because I do some things strictly for Titan.
Yeah, right on.
And you know, which is great, because what American tough guy writer doesn't want to be published by a UK publisher?
Of course, of
right.
course.
So it's natural.
So it's interesting, and of course the UK, say with Spillane, for example, your great mentor, there's been a lot of UK relationships tied into the Spillane universe. I'm thinking of Victor Saville and
yeah, there are a lot of things. Victor Saville was a well-known director and producer who moved from the UK, where he had some very, very big successes, to the United States, where he had some very big successes. And he ended up doing 4 of Spillane's books as films. Spillane didn't like any of them, but he was wrong about a couple of them. Eye of the Jury is a pretty darn good movie. Kiss Me Deadly is a classic film noir. And in fact, when we went to England to show my documentary, Mike Hammer's Mickey Spillane, there was a time where he was on stage with me, and there was a very, very erudite interviewer. And when I was sitting there, he was asking Mickey wonderful questions, getting all kinds of wonderful stuff out of him. So I did something uncharacteristic for me. I just sat back and kept my mouth shut, because I thought, he's got Mickey Spillane on stage. He doesn't need to talk to me. But I was up there because I was, you know, the director and writer of the documentary. And at one point, this interviewer turned to me and said, Max, I understand there's one thing that you and Mickey disagree about. And Mickey kind of looked at me like, what would that be? And I said, that's right. I think Kiss Me Deadly is a great movie. Mickey doesn't like it, but it is a big part of his legacy, is why his books will continue to be read over the years. Because, and I said it this way, I said, because even the greatest crime writer, mystery writer, has to have some movies made from the material. Agatha Christie came back into vogue because of those movies that were done. And the 2 Bogart films, one fueled the Maltese Falcon and one fueled The Big Sleep and Philip Marlowe. So you've got, Hammett has some great movies made from his work. Chandler has some great movies made. James M. Cain has some great movies made, and that keeps them being read. And Mickey just kind of looked at me like that had never occurred to him. And I felt like it was a real triumph for me, because there was an interview done with him later where they asked him, well, who was the best Mike Hammer on screen? And he said, well, of course I was, because he had played Mike Hammer in The Girl Hunters, a British production.
Right on.
A British production. And he said, and they asked him, and he said, but the next best one was Ralph Meeker. And Ralph Meeker was Mike Hammer in Kiss Me Deadly. So I turned Mickey Spillane's opinion around on a movie that he thought he hated, and he revisited it and realized that it was pretty special.
I've always loved that story, and I think it's the perfect segue into talking about our relationship on Mike Hammer, Max Allan Collins, Titan, and the Mike Hammer Legacy Project. And
well, we met as fans of Mickey Spillane, not
right.
really as colleagues or anything.
Absolutely right.
Met at a Titan booth.
Yeah,
I think.
here in San Diego about 15 years ago.
And that's where our friendship started.
Absolutely right. Yeah, just talking about Mickey.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm one in a long line of British super fans of Spillane.
Yeah, I have to say, when we presented the documentary at the British Film Institute, Mickey did signing afterwards. Just, he didn't have anything he was selling, just like to allow people to bring the books. And we were mobbed, and many of them was very, very almost touching, because a lot of them were people like Mickey who were World War I veterans, and who had loved his books in the late 40s and early 50s that he had written, and they acted like they were in the presence of a god.
Yeah.
And he couldn't have been more charming and sweet, which he was, a very charming, sweet man. At least in his older years. He may have been something else in his younger years. But when I knew him, he was just the gentlest guy you could even imagine. And he never was ever brusque with his readers. He said, they're not my fans, they're not my readers, they're my customers.
Yeah.
He always said they were his customers. And so he had great respect for the people and gratitude to the people who bought his books.
It's interesting. I've got an anecdote for you, actually, which I
okay.
know I've never told you. You just made me think of it now. Speaking of a long-term Spillane fans, my grandfather, Pop Smythe, who I've mentioned to you before, was a long-term Spillane fan, and he served with an American unit in World War II, which is why I grew up with such a love of American popular culture, because he came back from the war having read his comics, you know, in the European theatre. He was a huge Spillane fan. And I got thrown out of primary school twice when I was a kid, within 6 months of each other. And the first time was because I had issue 1 of Savage Sword of Conan, the black and white comic, in my desk. Yeah. And I got thrown back home. And the person who picked me up was Pop Smythe, the man who bought me Savage Sword of Conan. Right. And then a couple of weeks later, I got kicked home because I had a Mickey Spillane novel in my desk. Thrown back home to Pop Smythe, the man who gave me the Mickey Spillane novel. So yeah, he is emblematic of that, you know, that generation of World War II veterans who just love Mickey. Now,
I was expelled for having a copy of Re-Enter Fu Manchu. It was a gold medal book that had a belly dancer on the cover, who was painted by Barry Phillips, who was one of Spillane's cover artists. So. We're brothers
in so many ways.
In so many ways.
And just to cap that one off rather beautifully, we didn't plan this. Actually, the entire Fu Manchu series has been reprinted by Titan Books. There we go. The ultimate literary salesman right here.
But do they have girls, who are belly dancers on the cover?
Well, one of them does.
Okay.
So Max, let's talk about. Let's spend some time on the Mike Hammer Legacy Project, what it is and how it came to be, and where you got to with it.
Well, I can go, if we've got time, I'd go back to the very beginning of, I had been a huge Mickey Spillane fan, and one thing you have to know about Spillane that's a little bit forgotten now is how controversial he was and how unpopular he was with certain aspects of the mystery fiction world. And I read Hammett, I read Chandler, I read Spillane, and I thought they were on even keel. And then I found out there were a bunch of people that really didn't like Mickey's work. And I thought they were wrong, and I began writing articles and really kind of being his defender. I was really known as the guy who defended Mickey Spillane, even into my own writing career. And I wrote him as a kid, and as an adolescent, and as a teenager, and as a young man, I wrote him fan letters all the time. And I had written him scads and scads of fan letters. So in 1981, the BoucherCon, the big mystery convention, I was approached by the people running it saying, Mickey is going to be a guest, one of our guests of honor, and we need somebody to be a liaison between the convention and Mr. Spillane, and you're the guy known for being his biggest fan and his defender. Would you do that? And I did. And the night before, I didn't sleep the night before, because what happens if, when you meet your hero, and he's a disappointment or a nasty, and there are plenty of really wonderful, talented people who are kind of dicks when you meet. So let's face it. And so they took me up to Spillane's hotel room, and I was very nervous. And Mickey answered the door, and he was not a tall man, but his width of his shoulders was just like amazing. So you have a doorway, and he's filling it. And they say, Mickey, this is Max Allan Collins. And he says, oh, well, I've known Max. We've been corresponding for years. And I said, yes, Mickey, one letter from you, which he had sent me when I got published and sent in my first 2 books. One letter from you and 100 letters from me. and he grinned, and it was a little risky thing maybe to say, but I'm that way. And so we became fast friends just instantly, and he invited me down to his home in South Carolina, flew down there, and over the next coming years, I'd be visiting with him a couple times a year, sometimes with Jim Traylor, who wrote the Spillane biography with me.
Fantastic.
Which is a book I'm very proud of.
Wonderful book. I'm ashamed to say that we didn't publish it.
You did not publish that one.
It's a phenomenal piece of work.
And the reason I did the documentary on Mickey was Mickey said he wanted to write his own autobiography, which he never did. But as Jim and I would go down there, or I'd go down there with my wife Barb, and we'd visit, we did become friends. And it was always surprising to me when Barb would say, a phone call from me from Mickey Spillane. I'm like, that doesn't even make any sense to me. But we were friends. So he began showing me, because he wasn't writing at that point, he'd almost retired. And he said, well, I've got, and he'd show me some manuscripts, and here's a little bedtime reading for you, he'd say, before I went to, and he'd give me 100 pages of an unpublished Mike Hammer novel. And he did that several times, and I was like, Mickey, how many unfinished pieces of yours are? Oh, they're all around. They're in this office, they're in that office, because he had 3 offices at his home. And so I just, in the back of my mind, I thought, if he doesn't finish those books, I'm going to finish those books. I mean, I was thinking that in the early 80s. And when toward the end of his life, well, actually, he called me on the phone, very, very upbeat, and he dropped a bomb, the way Mickey Spillane as a storyteller often would. And he said, well, they've diagnosed me with pancreatic cancer. Now, I knew that was a death sentence.
Yep.
It's about the roughest, diagnosis you can get. And we just kind of talked for a couple more phone calls, and then maybe the 3rd phone call after that, he said, I'm working on the last Mike Hammer, but I might not get it finished. Would you finish it for me if I can? I said, I hope I don't have to, but obviously I will. And that book is called The Goliath Phone. And so he apparently hung up his phone and turned to his wife, Jane, and said, when I'm gone, there's going to be a treasure hunt around here. Remember, there's 3 offices. He says, take everything you find and give it to Max, and he will know what to do. And I didn't hear that till after his death, that he had said that. So we went, Barbara and I, my wife Barbara and I went down to his, it wasn't his funeral, it was a celebration of his life. They had a private funeral, and they had a lot of people. I mean, there's like a tent, and there are people from the area that came in, and people from all over the country. You know, Stacy Keach was there, and you know, some of his producers and so on were there. And when the whole shooting match was over, I think the shooting match is appropriate with Mickey's playing. Barb and I sat down with Jane, and we went through all 3 offices and got all the material we found, and we were literally sitting around a table in a dining room with stacks. Each of us had stacks of unpublished Mickey's Playing stuff. And periodically, somebody there would say, "Here's a hammer, you got a hammer," because of course that was the stuff that we really wanted to make sure got done. And so I ended up taking home, I don't know, 6 to 8 manuscripts that were substantial. And then then there were more that were increasingly less substantial, to where you had, well, here he did a couple of chapters and indicated what the ending was going to be, to down to 1-page synopses. So I set up about to make sure that those substantial manuscripts got finished. And I had a deal for 3 books with Otto Penzler at Mysterious Press. And there's something happened where Otto's publishing kind of shut down for a little bit. He's back now, and has been back for years. But I knew Nick Landau pretty well from meeting him here with you, and because he had wanted to do something with Ms. Shriek.
And Nick Landau, by the way,
is our publisher.
Is my boss, is the owner of Titan Books, the co-owner of Titan Books. Titan Books is owned by Vivian Chung and Nick Landau, and they own a big pop culture publishing empire and the Forbidden Planet retail chain in the UK, which is the 3rd biggest seller of comic books in the world. There we go.
So
hello, Nick, if you watch it.
So Nick basically said, "I want to pick this up and finish this," because I think he had a feeling like there was a legacy here that we needed to respect. And so I began writing these for one a year for Titan, always starting with the longest manuscript, so there's the least me in there. And the Goliath Bone was the one that was done by Otto Penzler, probably has the least, by Mickey was pretty close to the end of the manuscript. And I took it, the technique I took with it, which probably some purists would have objected to, is that I did not just take Mickey's manuscript and then complete it. I took it as a rough draft, and if Mickey would sometimes write around scenes, like the scene would start with saying, "Oh, that DA doesn't know what he's talking about," and he hadn't written the scene about the DA. So part of what I did was filling in areas and then just polishing it a little bit, because they were rough drafts. And then at a certain point it would be just me. And the reviews I've gotten that make me the most happy are the ones that say, "You cannot tell where Spillane leaves off and Collins starts." That I couldn't have a better compliment than that. And because I wanted to honor him, and I didn't want to just do continuation books. And I never set out to write my own Mike Hammer books.
Yeah.
What I wanted to do, quite frankly, was when I was a young man, and I would read in the New York Times about the books that were coming out, the book deals people had, and Mickey would announce a book by a title, and then that book would never come out.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, what happened to the Consummata that you wrote about? What happened about, so I was trying to write the books that I could that I hadn't got to read. So I put them on, so on my shelf at home, you have all the Spillane books, then you have all my continuation books on the same shelf. And we did a couple that were not Hammers. We did one, these were done at Hard Case Crime actually, not at Titan.
Yeah.
One was called Dead Street,
Yeah.
and that was one that was a pretty complete manuscript. And then another one was The Consummata, which was the Morgan Raider sequel. He had done a book called The Delta Factor that was supposed to launch a new series, and he started the second book in the series and never finished it. Well, that was my job.
Yeah.
So that has been incredibly gratifying, and the fact that a number of publishers, primarily Titan, but not only Titan, allowed me to develop my own stuff so that I wasn't just, well, he's the guy that writes the Mike Hammer books from Mickey Spillane's,
Yeah.
wastebasket or whatever, I don't know what they thought. And so I very much wanted to make my own mark with my own work. And Nathan Heller is the major thing.
Which you have done spectacularly. I think what you touched upon is the key to the Hammer Legacy project, which is that it's not like, say, Robert B. Parker passes away and Ace Atkins continues the character, which I think he did very well, but it's a very different thing. You're completing the books based upon Mickey's actual work.
Yes, and I try to do, I try not to, what I would do, and we're kind of at the end now. We've done the 14.
That's where I was going with, because
Yeah.
you really have completed it.
We have completed it, and I would read, because these manuscripts were all through his life, at different points in his life. So, and I was familiar with the way he wrote, because while he had a period of 9 years where he didn't publish novels, he was publishing novellas in men's adventure magazines. And so I would go to, let's say, I would kind of try to determine, sometimes it was written on the manuscript, try to determine when did he work on this? And then I would go and would read a bunch of stuff that he had done, in that same period. So this book would sound like what Mickey would have put out at that point. So they weren't done in continuity. They bounce all around. So that was a goal of mine. But then I didn't want to just imitate him. I felt like, because people ask me all the time, wasn't it intimidating to continue his work? This man you admired his writing. I said, no. First of all, he believed in me. Second of all, I took Mickey Spillane books like vitamins when I was a kid. And so it was in me. So I just I tried to get into Mike Hammer persona and just do Mike Hammer the way I thought Mickey created him. Now, there are some differences. I think he had a slightly different, he was very funny, but his sense of humor and my sense of humor don't match. And so my books are maybe a little more wise guy than his books were. And I think there's maybe a little more humane point of view in these books. And I do have people who tell me that they like mine better than Mickey's. And of course, I defend Mickey at that point.
I'm one of those people. I think, our friend, a mutual friend, Professor Ed Cato, he's always flying that. He prefers your Hammer flag to Spillane. So do I actually. And I love Spillane like you. I love Hammer. But I would say, if I, as an outsider, as not you, as somebody who is very familiar with your work, if I was to say what was the difference to you between Spillane Hammer and Collins Hammer, I would say your Hammer is slightly warmer and slightly less of a dick.
Yeah, that's probably true, but he still does terrible things.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
He does terrible things.
He's not watered down in any way.
But because one of the things I wanted to do, one of the techniques of his that I do absolutely do is, when the story's over, the story's over.
Yeah.
The bad guy gets it, and there's no Perry and Della and Paul Draker sitting around the office. Well, Perry, why did you do this? And why did you do that? And, well, here's why. Well, none of that. None of that whatsoever.
Yeah, something I just want to touch upon about completing the Hammer Legacy project is indeed the final novel, which is out right now, Baby It's Murder. and it does a very interesting thing in that it brings Mike's life to a close,
Yeah.
rounds out his life, and there's, without going into specifics about this, there is something that I know Max spent a long time working on, and we went back and forth on it, and I know you talked to Barbara about it as well, and that's that if you read the final Mike Hammer novel, I would pay particular attention to the last line of the novel, which is something you gave a great deal of thought to, and is an echo of the last line of another very significant novel, and that's as much as I will say about that. But that, to me, reading that line is a beautiful moment that kind of wraps up Hammer's very long career.
And it was a risk because I thought it could come off as clever or too glib, but I think it's heartfelt. And one of the differences between Spillane and Spillane/Collins novels is I spend a little more time with Velda. He did a great job with Velda, the secretary, the love of his life, but there are some things Mickey did that he didn't really explain why she disappeared and was like a spy in Russia. And that always bothered me. So in one of the novels, where she's just kind of come back, I usually wrote the back end of the book. This, I wrote the front end of the book so that I could take Mickey's character to Russia.
Yeah.
And make those adventures more credible and make Velda's having been a kind of a secret agent more credible, and also to make her more of an equal partner to him. And of course, I have a certain affection for Velda because she was the inspiration for my character with Terry Beatty, Ms. Tree.
Beautiful segue, exactly where I was going to go next, Max.
Remember when we planned that? How carefully we planned that?
So, tell us about Mystery, which I would introduce as your glorious female private detective series, co-created with Terry Beatty.
How many volumes did Titan?
We've done 6 archive editions collecting virtually the whole thing.
Well, I have to. First thing
that's Titan Comics, by the way, everybody.
The first thing I should say is that at that point in the world of comics, comic books, there was very little crime fiction done. You know, nobody had done To Perdition yet, for example. Yeah. And I didn't want to write. I wanted to do what I do, but in comics form. And so I got a call from Dean Mullaney, who liked my Mike Mist strip that Terry and I did, which was a minute mystery strip that appeared in the Chicago Reader. And he said he's going to do this magazine called Eclipse, and it was going to be mostly really big shot superstars doing like little stories or starting continued stories. And but he wanted Terry and me to be part of that. And he even gave us the last slot in the magazine. And frankly, we got the most attention of anything that was published in that magazine, and we were spun off.
I bought that, by the way, mate.
Did you buy that?
And I've still done it. Yeah.
we were spun off into a comic book, and the comic book, it was the longest running. It was at several different publishers, but it was the longest running private eye comic book ever done to date, and is still the longest running. Right. And the premise was, which was something I kind of pitched off the top. I pitched off the top of my head the premise of Mystery, and I pitched off the top of my head it was a made-up pitch on the moment for Road to Perdition, and those are two of the things that were really kind of successful. But I said, well, Dean, what if Mike Hammer and Velda finally get married? And then Mike Hammer is murdered on their wedding night, and Velda has to, take over the agency, and her first case is solving his murder. And it was a hard yes right there. And so we didn't call her Velda, but she looks like Velda, and she's essentially is you know, her DNA is there's a lot of Elda in her DNA. And we bucked the tide. It was never a huge hit, but was again a cult hit. 7 readers of short of making a living. But we ran a long time, and I think you can just see Terry Beatty develop as an artist from a very wonderful cartoony style into something more real. And part of what that was about was when I was doing the Dick Tracy strip, I was doing a lot of contemporary crimes. I thought that's how Gould started out, so I will do contemporary crimes. And I would bump into a contemporary crime that they wouldn't let me do. You know, like bombing abortion clinics and so on. Yeah. And so I would do those stories in Ms. Tree. So she did a lot of very contemporary crimes and contemporary stories. And I also wanted to explore with Ms. Tree someone who acted like Mike Hammer, what would really happen. And what really happened was she went to jail and prison, which allowed me to do prisoner cell block H, basically. Yeah, right. And then she then had to get, was institutionalized, and they medicated her. So it was just, what would have really happened to somebody who behaved like that? So we had a lot of fun with that. And she eventually becomes a mother in a book called One Mean Mother. Yeah. and I had always hoped, and I know Terry had always hoped, that they'd be collected. And God bless them, Titan did 66 volumes, and it's really all the stories, except for a few little ancillary things that we did. That you don't know this, but Nick and I may be talking about gathering those.
Excellent. Yeah.
There's a thing called the PIs that was done at First Comics.
I love that. Yeah.
So yeah, it's, you probably have already gathered that my whole career is getting paid for my hobby.
Right on. I mean, one of the great pleasures of my working life is that at Max and I have these regular plotting sessions, if you will, for what Titan's going to end up publishing. And it's late in the evening for me, and mid-afternoon for Max. Yeah. And it's
cooking stuff up, right?
Right on. Yeah, no, for sure. And on that note, before we move on to the final thing I want to touch upon, let's just have one final blast on the Hammerverse and talk about what's happening with the movies and Mike Hammer.
There is, as you may know, there's a Mike Hammer movie in the works, but a lot of things are in the works. And so I never take it too seriously, but one of the things that was affecting it was that the Skydance and Paramount deal had to come through.
Yeah.
Well, it just did.
Yeah.
And the South Park boys had a good time with it, which God bless those guys. Finally, officially the option was picked up. Yeah. And we've got a star, and Matthew McConaughey has been signed, and the writer of the True Detective TV show, who stole my title of my book, True Detective. But I stole it from Mystery Magazine, so it doesn't really matter. But he's got a good script written, and I guess they're talking to directors now, and it's looking, I hate to say this, it's looking likely, I don't want to jinx it, but that will be, and then we have 14 Mike Hammer novels at Titan to reprint.
Right on.
So that will be pretty cool.
And it's a great showrunner, and it's a great star.
I think we have a real good chance of that actually happening, because really Hammer would have happened sooner post Stacy Keach, but there are some properties tied up by those British people, the Victor Saville estate, but that's been settled. Yeah. Which just at the same time that the Paramount Skydance thing was settled, which is really nice. So we're hopeful. And we have in our pocket, maybe I should mention this, but we have one final Spillane novel in our pocket. We haven't published yet, is a science fiction topic. And that would come out when this
We've talked about this.
Yeah, when this movie came out. And I already told Nick today that I wanted to do the novelization if there is a movie.
Yes, and
So-
I know he's aware of this. And I would say the last thing that's come out of our kind of cooking sessions, if you will, is the final topic for today, which is your upcoming book for 2026, which is the return of the Maltese Falcon.
Yeah, and it was something I gave to Titan, but Titan said no, it really belongs to Hard Case Crime because they wanted to do that kind of cover.
Yeah, right on.
Which is a typical fun. There's the Nathan Heller novels that have that kind of cover that I wanted, which is that, you know, again, I always talk about the fact that when I got my first agent, he was a guy named Knox Berger, who had been the Gold Medal Books editor, and my teacher at the University of Iowa Writers Workshop, my instructor was Richard Yates, who's a very distinguished mainstream author. He wrote Revolutionary Road, for example, and he said, and he had written Knox Berger said, well, you should like, I think you're going to like him. He's really, you know, he likes to do the mystery stuff and the crime stuff. And Knox took me, but in that letter he said, I'm afraid young Mr. Collins is a blacksmith in an automotive age. And, you know, but you know, you need blacksmiths even in an automotive age.
And you still
right?
do. You absolutely still do.
So anyway, as far as the return of the Maltese Falcon is concerned, I had been for years, and I mean probably decades, looking at that 1929, 1930 copyright and thinking, that thing is going to go into public domain in my lifetime. And so we got, you know, so I had been lying in wait to make sure nobody else thought of it or put
This
it
is
in
really
motion.
true. This is absolutely
Yeah,
what
and I it was cloaked in a certain amount of intrigue. I said, you know, we can't come out till January 2026, but I'll get it written and you'll be ready to go. And everybody thought it was a good idea. And I did not have the book written, but I did have a bit of a synopsis, I believe.
Yeah, right.
And one of the concepts was that it would not be a new Sam Spade story in terms of this is his next case. It happens 2 weeks after the end of the Maltese Falcon novel. And almost all of the characters are characters who either were in the Maltese Falcon or were mentioned in the Maltese Falcon and something happened off stage. And, you know, so I worked within I did really work within his style, probably more than I do with Mickey, because he had if you read the Maltese Falcon, it's very, it's incredibly stingy.
Yeah.
He does a third person style. Everything is through Spade's point of view, but he never lets you inside Spade's head. He will never tell you what Spade is thinking. So Spade's in every scene, and we're seeing it through his eyes. That's very unusual as a narrative technique, and incredibly tricky to do. And I know one of the things that Charles Ardai did, who was the editor. I was not able to bring you over with me, but so Charles is very protective of his line.
And I knew that once we ported it over to our case, I knew it meant that I wouldn't be editing it. Which is source of great personal sorrow, but I'm far happier that the book exists.
Well, he knew what I was up to, and so if I slipped and told you what Spade was thinking, you know, he'd circle it and say, now we know what Spade is thinking, so you've got to get rid of that. And he'd be right. He'd be definitely right.
It's a fantastic book. You are going to love it. It is out at the beginning of 2026. That is the return of the Maltese Falcon. And I'm going to wrap this up by saying, sorry you didn't have any time for any questions, but as you can see, we could have filled another hour talking about Max's career easily. We could have filled another week, as we so often do, brother. But let me say a few things, which are the relationship between Titan Books and Max Allan Collins continues, and there is stuff we are talking about at the moment which will form
We
what
cannot
we do
reveal.
next. We
We
can't
cannot
reveal
reveal.
it. And And then I can say this, Max, because I'm here talking to you in real time. Working with you is one of the great pleasures of my professional life, and it's been a wonderful 15 years for me working with you, and a wonderful 20 years for you, Titan. So
I feel exactly the same way. What was your name again?
That's a good question. Sumner.
I feel with great sincerity. It is, you know, I've had some editors I really liked, and it's always dangerous because you don't know if an editor could be gone tomorrow. But you seem like you have a pretty good foothold at Titan.
I'm pretty hardy.
And I can risk having you be one of my best friends.
Yeah, right on, brother, right on, brother. A round of applause. Wonderful. And before we leave you, please give a round of applause for our wonderful Comic-Con volunteers, without whom there would be no show. If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.